At the edge of a scarred European battlefield, where the earth had been torn open by weeks of shellfire, there stood a fortress the enemy believed could not fall. It dominated the surrounding valley from a rise of broken stone and reinforced concrete, its guns positioned with mathematical precision to cover every approach. Supply routes ran through its shadow, communication lines depended on its survival. As long as it stood, the entire defensive sector remained intact. If it fell, a corridor would open straight into the heart of German-controlled territory. For 23 relentless days, Allied forces tried to break it. Infantry advanced across open ground and were cut down before they reached the outer wire. Artillery batteries pounded its walls until the horizon disappeared behind smoke. Yet when the dust settled, the guns inside answered back. Night raids slipped toward its perimeter under darkness, only to be met by flares that turned midnight into daylight. Again and again, the attackers withdrew, leaving behind shattered equipment and rows of casualties. Thousands had already died trying to silence those guns. The fortress was not ancient stone. It was modern war made concrete. Thick reinforced bunkers were dug deep into the earth, layered with steel plating and sandbags. Interlocking fields of fire from machine gun nests overlapped so precisely that no blind spot remained. Trenches zigzagged outward like veins, each one protected by barbed wire, landmines, and hidden firing ports. Artillery pieces were recessed into hardened casemates, invisible until they fired. Observers stationed in elevated positions scanned the terrain through periscopes, directing deadly accuracy onto any movement below. From above, it looked compact. From the ground, it was a maze. The surrounding terrain only added to its power. A wide stretch of exposed land separated the strong point from the nearest cover. The soil had been churned into mud by constant bombardment, slowing advancing troops to a crawl. Craters filled with rainwater became traps. Any unit attempting a direct assault had to cross hundreds of meters under uninterrupted fire. There were no forests to hide in, no natural ridges to shield in advance. The defenders had chosen their ground carefully. Every inch favored them. Inside this bastion stood a German major who had come to embody its defiance. Experienced, disciplined, and hardened by years of warfare, he believed utterly in the strength of his position. Reports from the front confirmed what he could already see with his own eyes. The enemy could not get close. Every failed assault reinforced his confidence. Each destroyed attack proved his calculations correct. To him, the fortress was not merely concrete and steel. It was proof of German engineering, planning, and resolve. When shells struck the outer walls, he did not panic. When Allied troops massed in the distance, he did not hesitate. His artillery responded with controlled, deliberate force. His men operated like machinery, loading, firing, repositioning, while communication lines remained intact beneath the protection of buried cables. Supplies still reached them under cover of darkness. Morale astonishingly held firm. They were surrounded by destruction, yet untouched in spirit. The major reportedly told his officers that the enemy would exhaust themselves long before the fortress ever fell, and after 23 days, that prediction seemed accurate. Conventional tactics had failed for clear reasons. Frontal assaults only fed the defensive advantage. Prolonged bombardment could not penetrate reinforced concrete buried beneath layers of earth. Attempts at encirclement faltered due to the fortress's commanding elevation and overlapping artillery support from nearby positions. Even coordinated infantry-artillery pushes collapsed under precise counterfire. Every move had been anticipated. Every weakness appeared sealed. The fortress had become more than a military obstacle. It had become a symbol. Among Allied troops, its reputation spread in hushed conversations. New units arriving at the front heard about the stronghold that it consumed entire battalions. Maps marked it as a priority target, yet soldiers privately wondered whether it was worth the cost. Veterans spoke of its machine guns as if they were living creatures. The name of the position carried weight, tension, and quiet dread. Meanwhile, inside its walls, confidence turned into certainty. The defenders measured time not in hours but repelled assaults. Each sunrise brought another failed attempt by the enemy. Each night ended with the fortress still standing. The major walked the reinforced corridors, knowing that no opposing soldier had breached his perimeter. Not one had crossed into the inner defenses. Not one had stood within those walls alive. For 23 days, that record remained unbroken. And yet, beyond the smoke-covered horizon, plans were changing. High Command understood that continuing the same strategy would only add to the casualty lists. Something different was required, something unconventional. The Strongpoint's power lay in its expectation of a direct attack. Its guns faced outward. Its minefields were positioned against advancing troops. Its observation posts scanned the obvious routes. What it did not expect was the impossible. As dawn approached on the 24th day, a strange stillness settled over the battlefield. No preparatory bombardment shook the ground. No infantry formations gathered in the open. The fortress guns waited for the familiar thunder of artillery that had preceded every previous assault, but none came. Inside the command bunker, the German major likely believed the enemy had finally accepted defeat. He did not yet know that somewhere in the fading darkness, 60 soldiers were already moving. Before the sun rose on the 24th day, the battlefield was wrapped in a silence so unfamiliar it felt unnatural. For weeks, every dawn had begun with artillery thunder. The German garrison had grown used to it, the distant rumble, the whistle of incoming shells, the shaking earth. That morning, there was nothing. No barrage, no movement in the valley, no columns forming in the open. Inside the fortress, sentries scanned the same killing ground they had watched for 23 days. The mud fields were empty. The cratered terrain showed no signs of preparation for attack. To the defenders, it appeared the enemy had finally learned the lesson written in blood. But several miles away, 60 soldiers were already advancing. They were Gurkhas, soldiers recruited from the hills of Nepal, serving under the British Army. For more than a century, their name had traveled across battlefields from the mountains of India to the trenches of Europe. Stories about them had become legend: silent movement, unmatched discipline, and an unwavering calm in close combat. Many enemies feared them long before ever seeing them. What set the Gurkhas apart was not just their courage, but their method. They were trained to operate in terrain where larger forces struggled: mountains, jungles, broken ground. They specialized in infiltration, stealth, and close-quarters fighting. Where conventional infantry advanced in waves, Gurkhas preferred shadows. Each man carried standard military equipment: rifle, ammunition, grenades, but there was one object that defined their identity: the kukri. The forward-curving blade was more than a tool or weapon. It was tradition forged in steel, compact, heavy at the tip, devastating in close combat. Its reputation alone had a psychological effect far greater than its size. German troops across multiple fronts had already heard rumors. They said Gurkhas did not shout when they charged. They said they moved at night without sound. They said that if you saw the kukri drawn, it was already too late. Whether exaggerated or not, such stories spread quickly in wartime. These 60 men had not been sent to launch another suicidal frontal assault. They had been selected for something precise, something calculated. High Command understood the fortress's strength. It was designed to repel visible threats, every gun pointed outward, every minefield protected against approach. Its power depended on early detection and overwhelming fire. So the Gurkhas did not approach in the expected direction.
Using terrain dismissed as impassable, they navigated ravines, drainage channels, and shattered woodland beyond the main defensive focus. They moved in small elements, spaced apart, communicating with hand signals rather than voice. Where barbed wire blocked the way, it was cut quietly. Where patrols passed nearby, they froze into the earth itself. Hours passed in careful, deliberate motion. Their objective was not to storm the outer trenches in daylight. It was to appear where no enemy believed a soldier could stand. As the first gray light of dawn touched the fortress walls, German lookouts remained focused on the valley below. That was where every attack had come from. That was where they expected to see movement again, if it came at all. Instead, shapes emerged behind the inner defensive line. Not hundreds, not thousands, 60. They appeared within the perimeter, having bypassed the outer killing fields entirely. Some accounts suggest they exploited blind spots between observation posts. Others indicate they climbed through areas considered too steep or too exposed to attempt. However they did it, the result was undeniable. Gurkha soldiers were now inside the defensive network that had held for 23 days. At first, disbelief spread through the German ranks. How could enemy troops be standing behind fortified positions without artillery support, without warning, without alarms? The German major was informed immediately. He reportedly stepped outside his command shelter to see for himself. What he saw was not a chaotic charge or scattered infiltrators. The Gurkhas stood in controlled formation, calm and steady, weapons ready. Some of them held rifles trained on key positions. Others had already secured strategic points inside the perimeter, and several unmistakably held kukris in their hands, blades catching the pale morning light. There was no shouting, no wild aggression, just presence. The psychological shock was immediate. For 23 days, the defenders had relied on distance, hundreds of meters separating them from danger. Their strength lay in firepower, not in hand-to-hand combat. Now the distance was gone. The Gurkhas had erased it. The major, confident only moments earlier, faced a reality no defensive blueprint had accounted for. His fortress was built to repel armies, not to withstand silent infiltration. His artillery could not fire on its own walls. His machine guns, positioned outward, could not pivot quickly enough to address threats inside. The battlefield equation had changed in a single dawn. The laughter that had followed every failed assault did not come that morning. Instead, uncertainty spread through the concrete corridors. Soldiers who had felt untouchable now gripped their weapons in confined spaces never meant for close combat. The Gurkhas did not rush forward immediately. They allowed the silence to work. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon on a battlefield is not artillery, it is fear.
The German major had faced artillery bombardments that shook concrete walls and turned the sky black with smoke. He had watched wave after wave of infantry disappear under the fire of his machine guns. For 23 days, every threat had come from a distance. Every enemy had been forced to cross open ground. Every attack had ended the same way. But this was different. 60 Gurkhas stood inside his defensive perimeter at dawn. At first, the major reportedly reacted with disbelief. Some accounts describe him laughing, not out of amusement, but out of instinctive denial. 60 men, after thousands had failed? The fortress had endured artillery, infantry assaults, and night raids. It had not been breached, not once. Surely this was a scouting element that had slipped through by accident. Surely they could be contained. He ordered them to surrender. The demand echoed across the concrete yard between reinforced bunkers. German soldiers repositioned nervously, rifles raised, unsure whether to fire. The Gurkhas did not respond immediately. They did not argue. They did not shout back. Instead, their officer stepped forward calmly and delivered a counter-demand. The fortress was surrounded. Resistance was pointless. Surrender now, and lives would be spared. The major laughed again, louder this time. Surrounded? Impossible. His communications were still active. His outer artillery positions had not reported a breakthrough. He believed these 60 men were isolated, trapped, brave, perhaps, but doomed. He refused. What happened next was not a reckless charge. It was controlled escalation. The Gurkhas slowly revealed what they carried. Rifles were already aimed with disciplined precision at machine gun nests and observation posts. Several men positioned themselves at choke points inside defensive corridors, cutting off movement between bunkers. Others calmly produced grenades and demolition charges, small, compact explosives ideal for confined spaces. And in the hands of many, unmistakable and visible even at a distance, were kukris. The curved blades caught the early sunlight. The psychological shift was immediate. The German defenders were trained for ranged combat. Their confidence came from interlocking machine gun fire and artillery support. In tight corridors and concrete rooms, those advantages meant little. Machine guns could not sweep narrow hallways without risking friendly fire. Artillery could not be turned inward without destroying their own position. The Gurkhas had chosen the one environment where discipline and close quarters skill outweighed heavy firepower. The major realized something critical. These men had not infiltrated by chance. They had secured key internal positions before revealing themselves. Ammunition storage points were now within grenade range. Communication hubs were covered by rifle sights. Escape routes were no longer safe. He attempted to stall for time. Another surrender demand was issued, this time harsher. The Gurkhas were warned they would be annihilated. Reinforcements would arrive. They had made a fatal mistake. No one moved. Then, without raising their voices, the Gurkhas advanced several paces forward in perfect coordination. It was not a sprint. It was not chaotic. It was deliberate. One group disabled a machine gun position before it could fully pivot inward. Another secured trench junction, silently overpowering the crew stationed there. Explosives were placed at structural weak points, not to demolish the entire fortress, but to demonstrate capability. The message was clear. Continued resistance would mean fighting inside tight corridors against men who specialized in exactly that kind of combat. The laughter stopped. German soldiers who had felt invulnerable behind steel and concrete now faced opponents only meters away. The reputation of the Gurkhas was no myth among European units. Stories had circulated of their effectiveness in close combat, of their refusal to retreat once engaged, of their discipline under pressure. Whether exaggerated or not, those stories now stood embodied in 60 calm figures holding curved blades and steady rifles. The major understood the arithmetic. His fortress had been designed to defeat battalions at a distance. It was not designed to survive a surgical strike from within. If full combat erupted inside those walls, casualties would be catastrophic, and not just for the attackers. Ammunition caches could ignite, structural supports could collapse. His men would be fighting room to room against soldiers who had already demonstrated superior positioning. The Gurkha officer issued the final warning: surrender now or face close quarters battle. There was no dramatic speech, no drawn-out negotiation, just a long, heavy silence stretching across the courtyard. The German major looked around at his men. For the first time in 23 days, they were not looking outward at distant enemies. They were looking inward at 60 soldiers who had done what thousands could not. They had erased the fortress's greatest advantage. And in that moment, the myth of invincibility began to crack. When the final refusal came, the Gurkhas did not argue again. They moved. What followed was not a chaotic battle, but a precise and disciplined internal assault, the kind designed to collapse resistance in minutes rather than hours. The objective was never to destroy the fortress with brute force, it was to break its will from the inside. The first action targeted control. Small Gurkha teams split with practiced coordination, each unit already aware of its assignment. One element secured the central communication trench, severing the ability to relay clear orders between bunkers. Field telephones were cut. Runners attempting to move between positions found routes blocked. Confusion spread faster than gunfire. Another team neutralized a key machine gun nest that had finally attempted to pivot inward. The confined angle made it difficult for the German crew to operate effectively. Before sustained fire could begin, Gurkha riflemen suppressed the position with controlled bursts. Grenades followed, not thrown wildly, but placed with intent. The gun fell silent. Inside the fortress corridors, the advantage of heavy weapons disappeared. Long barrels were awkward in tight concrete bends. Visibility was limited. Sound echoed sharply, magnifying every movement. In that environment, discipline mattered more than numbers. The Gurkhas advanced methodically. They did not rush into unknown rooms. They cleared sections one by one. A pair would cover an entry point while another moved. When resistance appeared, it was met with speed and overwhelming proximity. The kukri, though rarely needed in extended combat, served as a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. In close quarters, the mere sight of it shattered hesitation. Explosives were placed at ammunition stores, not detonated immediately, but positioned as leverage. The defenders now understood that a prolonged fight risked igniting their own supplies. The strong point that had protected them for 23 days could become a trap within minutes. The German major attempted to reorganize his men for an internal counterattack, but the structure of the fortress worked against him. Defensive architecture designed to repel external forces created compartmentalized sections. Once the Gurkhas seized key junctions, the garrison became isolated pockets rather than a unified force. Orders failed to reach their targets. Officers could not accurately assess where the attackers were. Reports conflicted, some claiming dozens more enemy soldiers had entered, others insisting the fortress was surrounded. The psychological pressure intensified. The Gurkhas maintained silence between movements, communicating through gestures and prearranged signals. Their calm contrasted sharply with the rising panic among defenders unprepared for combat at arm's length. The defenders had trained for distance, for calculated fields of fire, for predictable approach routes. Now they faced an enemy already inside their perimeter, dictating tempo and direction. Within a short span of time, several internal positions were under Gurkha control. The courtyard, the trench intersection, the main supply corridor, each secured in sequence. German soldiers who attempted isolated resistance found themselves outmaneuvered in confined space. Some laid down their weapons immediately rather than risk close combat. Others hesitated long enough to be disarmed. The major saw the situation clearly at last. Artillery could not be used without destroying his own stronghold. Machine guns were ineffective in narrow corridors. Reinforcements, even if dispatched, would require time the garrison no longer possessed. The fortress had not been overpowered by mass. It had been outmaneuvered by precision. The Gurkha officer delivered one final message. Continued resistance would result in systematic clearing of every bunker. No dramatic threats, no raised voice, just certainty. By now, enough positions had fallen internally that the outcome was visible. The stronghold that had resisted for 23 days had been compromised in less than an hour of internal engagement. One by one, weapons were lowered. Hands rose. The German major, who had once laughed at the sight of 60 soldiers, now faced the reality that those 60 had achieved what thousands could not. His fortress remained standing, its walls intact, its guns undestroyed, but its advantage had vanished. He gave the order to surrender. The gates that had never opened to an enemy assault were opened from within.
and word began to spread far beyond those concrete walls.
By the time the fortress gates opened from within, the battle had already transformed into something far larger than a tactical victory. The structure still stood. Its guns were mostly intact. Its walls had not been reduced to rubble by weeks of bombardment, and yet it had fallen, not to overwhelming firepower, not to a massive assault, but to 60 soldiers who had appeared where no one believed they could. News travels differently in war. It does not wait for official reports. It moves through whispers, intercepted radio signals, captured messengers, and the testimonies of shaken survivors. Within hours, nearby German units began receiving fragmented accounts. The unbreakable strongpoint had surrendered, not after total destruction, not after starvation, but after a small Gurkha force infiltrated and seized control from within. At first, many commanders dismissed it as exaggeration. Then, confirmation arrived. The major's position, the one that had held for 23 days and repelled repeated assaults, was no longer operational. Its artillery had fallen silent. Its garrison had laid down arms. Prisoners confirmed the same unbelievable detail. Gurkhas had breached the interior and forced surrender through close quarters dominance. The psychological impact was immediate. 17 nearby strongpoints had relied on the fortress as an anchor. It was their shield and symbol. As long as it stood, they believed the line could not collapse. Now, that certainty was gone. If such a position could be penetrated without a full-scale assault, what did that mean for the rest? German officers began reassessing their own defenses. Every trench, every bunker, every concrete shelter suddenly felt vulnerable. The same question echoed across command posts. If they did it there, could they do it here? Rumors amplified the fear. Some said hundreds of Gurkhas had slipped through unseen. Others claimed the fortress had been taken in complete silence without a single shot fired. The truth mattered less than the effect. The name Gurkha carried weight already. Now it carried proof. The collapse was not physical, it was psychological. Within 3 days, 17 additional enemy strongpoints surrendered, many without firing a shot. In some cases, white flags were raised at the mere report that Gurkha units were advancing toward their sector. Commanders who had been prepared to fight artillery battles were far less willing to risk close-quarters infiltration inside confined defenses. The domino effect was undeniable. Military analysts later pointed to several factors behind this chain reaction. First, the original fortress had been considered the most secure in the region. Its fall shattered confidence in defensive planning. Second, the method of its capture suggested that traditional fortification no longer guaranteed safety. Third, fear spreads faster than logistics. When soldiers believe an enemy can appear inside their perimeter without warning, sleep becomes impossible and morale deteriorates rapidly. The Gurkhas had not simply captured ground, they had captured initiative. Their success forced opposing units to divert attention inward, weakening coordinated resistance across the sector. Defensive commanders began overextending patrols, reallocating manpower to guard internal corridors, and second-guessing structural weaknesses. Paranoia replaced certainty. All of it began with 60 men at dawn. What made the event remarkable was not just bravery, but adaptation. For 23 days, conventional tactics had failed against reinforced concrete and calculated fields of fire. The solution had not been to apply more force, but to change the angle of attack entirely. By bypassing expectation, the Gurkhas turned strength into vulnerability. The German major's fortress had been engineered to repel armies from the outside. It had never been designed to withstand calm, disciplined infiltration from within. That lesson resonated across the battlefield. For the Gurkhas, the operation became another chapter in a long tradition of service defined by precision and resolve. For their opponents, it became a cautionary tale.
Fortifications may resist bombardment, but they cannot defend against fear once doubt takes root. 17 positions surrendered in 3 days, not because walls had crumbled, but because belief had. And in war, once the belief in invincibility falls, everything else follows.